Welcome to Paranormal M, the hub of the inexplicable wonders. Join us as we journey through the unknown, one eerie tale at a time. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Maybe drop a comment. Let's get ready to embrace the mystery together. Farm located on a road named after a lost enslaved person's graveyard. In 2016, my husband and I purchased a foreclosed home on over 10 acres in 2016. When my friend sent me the listing, I saw the street name and I was curious. I don't know what it would actually mean in the near future. I won't be posting the name of the street or the state we live in just for safety reasons. Why? I listen in too much true crime, and I know better. Some of y'all weirdos. The history. The graveyard. My street is named after the long-lost graveyard that was the final resting place for many people in a small community of enslaved peoples. There is written and transcribed history of its location, but it's never been found, and all that remember its location have now passed on. The only major clue we have is that it's marked by a large brown stone. In our area, stones and boulders are not common, so that would be a good landmark. It's never been located. The reason this graveyard is notable is for one supposed resident. From my reading, he was a well-known enslaved man who became a soldier and later a talented author. He published multiple books. His life is fairly well documented, but the end of his life is where the details fray. Due to being forced into hiding, his whereabouts became hard to track. Some say he perished in Pennsylvania, while local lore insists he died and was buried here. Other known residents: Henny. There have been stories as well as information listed in records and maps of a descendant of enslaved people, a woman named Henny who also lived in this area. One of my neighbors who had lived in this land since childhood remembers her when she was living. I have another neighbor who recently built his home on family land. One day I had the pleasure of meeting his extended family. They were telling me about their history on the land, where the eldest grandmother told me of her mother's cabin. She pointed into the woods nearby where I knew the ruins of a cabin were and said, "My mama was Mrs. Henny, and I was born in a cabin right over there." Henny is relevant later. The spooky. I'm just going to list these in order. The distorted broadcast. We had to do a large amount of renovation where we bought the home, so we spent time there. Very little furniture, no TV, no stereo, no radio. We used headphones for audio entertainment, but mostly it was very quiet there. I'd been at the house all day, and I'd been hearing this strange garbled sound all day as well. It was faint, but it sounded as if you had an AM radio on between two stations. I could hear talking, but not understand the words, and there was some static along with an occasional few notes of out-of-tune music. I had been hearing this all day and finally mentioned it to my husband when he came home. He sort of froze and stared at me. I said, "What?" Then he told me that he had been out in the woods exploring and found an old glass tube radio. He, of course, thought that it was neat and brought it home, put it in the basement just that morning. The door. There's a door going between my basement to my garage. It's large, heavy, and poorly fitted, and a pain to open and close. When you close it, there's quite a big sound from the big door squeezing into the almost too small frame. I've been home alone on multiple occasions when I know that this door is closed, and I suddenly hear it close on its own, without even hearing it open. The elemental. I consider myself sort of sensitive to things beyond the veil. Enough so that I've educated myself on the different manifestations that can occur. I strongly believe there's something that resides in my basement that is not human. It's energy without a face, but a lot of opinions. We've experienced cold breezes, lights going off and on, and just a general feeling of fuck off. Not in a violent way, but in a I've manifested here, this is mine, get out kind of way. Some days it doesn't mind sharing space, others you feel as if you're being rushed or pushing you out of its area. It seems to mind me less than my husband and former dog walker. It could be who shuts and, I assume, has to open the door. The lighter. My entire life I've believed in the paranormal, but I'd never experienced something that I couldn't explain. That changed in this house. My husband and I were cooking dinner when a series of strange events occurred. I'd fully moved into the house and had the Alexa playing music. We were listening along with the song changed mid-chorus to Tequila Makes Her Clothes Fall Off. And this is going to seem made up, but I swear to y'all, this is what happened next. A bottle of Patron that had been sitting on the counter since our wedding a year earlier. We don't drink, it was leftovers and had been sealed since. It suddenly expelled its cork onto the counter. We both watched it happen. Taking my cue that something wasn't right here, I went to grab some sage from storage. How I thought that was going to help, I do not know. But from the kitchen I hear my husband shout, "No, fuck this, burn the whole house down." I come back in confused and he says while pointing to one or two long-nosed lighters that we had in the counter because our stove wasn't lighting properly, "That lighter just spun around on the table completely on its own." He pointed to the purple lighter with the red one beside it. I was shocked and rejected the idea as some sort of joke. I said, "No, it didn't. You're making that up." I finished my sentence and watched as right in front of me the red lighter did its own spin as if spun by an invisible hand. That is one sight I cannot explain or dismiss. The emergency. At 4 a.m., I'm passed out on the couch. The house was quiet. Suddenly, there's loud banging and flashlights at my front door. I scream. My husband comes running out of the room in his drawers and answers the door to 4 county police officers. Their guns are drawn. Once he verifies that he's the homeowner, they ask if anybody was in distress. He told them no and asked why. Apparently, the sheriff's department had received not 1 but 3 calls from our landline to 911. They only heard screaming. We don't have a landline phone. Even more than that, the power company accidentally cut our physical landline cable in the ground over a year prior. Henny. This story is borrowed from my neighbor who knew Henny. When my neighbor was a child, her father was a farmer, used to give Henny produce. Every day, Henny would walk 2 miles over fields and woods to pick up various veggies from his farm. Now, this wouldn't be that odd, but Henny was just in her 80s and completely blind. Stories were told that Henny was a witch, and this is how she managed the journey without her sight. Even more stories about her sight was lost. They said that when she was much younger, she had found out her husband had been having multiple affairs. To punish him, she cast a spell or brewed a potion that made him deaf, blind, and mute so that no woman would want him. The payoff for that spell was that when he died, she would also suffer one of the 3 fates. He died years later, and suddenly she went blind. Many years later after her passing, her cabin still partially standing, but mostly overtaken by the woods. My neighbor and her brother were riding horses down the road. Suddenly, these calm, bomb-proof, quiet, sensible horses planted their feet, refused to move another inch. No matter what they did to push them forward, the horses pranced, pawed, and wanted to turn back down the road. When my neighbor looked to find why they were so upset, she followed their gaze to the edge of the woods where the halls of Henny's cabin stood. And there within a window was Henny watching them with her milky, blind eyes. Smaller occurrences. Just weird little things that have happened that don't have a whole story attached. Barn. We cleared land and built a barn in 2019. Since then, I've heard the songs of a child and the voice of a man in the barn. Clear enough that I've gone looking for them. I don't know the workings of new structures attracting spirits, but we've never experienced this before the barn was built. It seems that if there's a spirit of a female child, she likes horses. I do find missing things in places that make no sense at all, like she's playing with me. I never heard the singing and the harsh male voice at the same time, so I don't think they get on. The lights in the woods. When we moved to the property and there was no one around for acres and thick mature forest was surrounding us. We cleared some land for a paddock for our horses and started noticing a warm orange light in the woods just beyond the fence line. I saw the light one night and we insisted that we would investigate in case it was somebody camping in our woods. My husband wasn't interested in seeing the spooky light in the woods and said that we should wait till daytime and then look. The next day we hiked up there to see what it could be. We found the ruins of another cabin that we didn't know was there. Exactly where the light was shining, we still see the light. Man in overalls. Both my husband and I have sort of out of the corner of my eye type of thing seen an older black man with curly white hair wearing overalls. Usually when we're out doing something on the land, we see him walking on the farm like he's got somewhere to be. No interactions, just a brief flash of him and movement, and then he's gone. I have no explanation as to what actually transpired. I was there, and I don't even believe it. The following happened this past Sunday. For background on myself, I'm almost 42, and I'm very rational and analytical about things. I did very well in science classes for being able to think from many angles about the functions of things and so on and so forth. I'm an atheist skeptic. You get the idea. However, what transpired boggles me so, and strangely each morning since that memory of that very day seems to get foggy and I need to try harder to recall anything about that day. Which is why I'm cementing it as pretty much great detail as possible with these events. I have a weekend job working in a community center for a major city. My tasks are to oversee renters who rent out portions or rooms at the center. The building I work in was built in 1951 and has an auditorium that also acts as a basketball court now. Once it was used as a movie theater in its early days. Many of the renters of the facility as a whole are various Christian groups of all varieties. Some hold Sunday school or a mass-like service, or too many double-A meetings. The auditorium is used for a major mass-like service with several hundred chairs, and lucky me has been scheduled to work as sole worker the past several months on Sundays. I'd be breaking down the event, which mainly consists of putting away the chairs and rented items back into storage. I've done this for over a year now, but only in the past few months I've worked alone on this. I'm reliable and physically very capable of doing it alone, which is probably why my boss has me scheduled alone. Typically, there's a brief overlap of time where at least 2 employees are scheduled, usually a half hour or an hour. The coworker before me is the most trusted worker there and the one who's worked there the longest, though he's much younger than me, but I trust him, and him and I get things done. Once a month, a larger dance event takes place in the auditorium and needs to begin with setup shortly after the mass meeting, after that concludes, because it's a big event that requires a lot of furniture. I was scheduled to work at my usual time at about 1:30 p.m. It varies very slightly from week to week. The renters of the auditorium have the place rented until about 1:30 p.m., but they pretty much always are just out after 1. I arrive at work and head to the office to see the day's itinerary and retrieve keys for the building rooms. I see coworkers and they're chatting a bit in the office about what needs to be done. As usual, he's completed everything, or just about, which always leaves me just going straight to the auditorium to begin breaking down the setup. So he goes off to deal with some renters and get signatures, and I head off to the auditorium to begin. This is pure routine, as it always is. But this time, there are 3 sets of double doors to the auditorium, I'll normally go through one of the first two double doors, but as I approach the doors, all seems normal. Until I stop directly in front of the door. I suddenly hear loud noises coming from inside the auditorium. To me, they sound as if people are moving things around. So in my mind, I'm thinking the renters maybe had a couple of larger items that are there, only now strolling out of the auditorium through the back double door. So I pull out my key, unlock the door, open the door just enough that I could sneak in without letting anybody know that they're maybe outside, catch a peek at what's being moved. There's nothing that I can see, but what I do see as soon as I enter the building is a mechanical shuttered door to one of the storage rooms. There are 2 storage rooms. They're being manipulated as if someone's inside pushing or punching different spots on the door. Begin walking down the first aisle nearest the door as I normally do. I take a good look at the entire place and see not a single person or moving thing beside the single door. My coworker made no mention to me that there was anybody in the storage room, but I'm thinking maintenance worker, even though the maintenance doesn't work on Sunday. Slowly walking down the court floors, I'm staring at this moving door, and yet I see nobody at all. I was wondering why both doors to that storage room are shut. The one that's being pushed about is a wider door, which the basketball court moved through to be stored, so we also use it to roll in and out the stacks of chairs out of storage. The other door is the single-sized, sort of manual metal rolling shutting door. The kind you have to reach for the bottom and lift up into the ceiling as it rolls away. But this door you can walk across the storage room and reach the controls for the electronic double door. But both doors are completely closed, so I'm wondering why they wouldn't at least have the smaller one opening, assuming that they were working on the larger door. So I begin walking around even slower toward the storage room as I'm trying to piece together what's going on. I reach for my back pocket, pull out my phone to send a text to my coworker, to ask if someone was working inside the storage room. I just then begin to hear voices, and I look over the double exit door, which I initially thought would be used to be moving something large out of, and I assume I'm hearing voices through that door, but no. They're coming from the storage room's direction. They are very tiny, very dirty windows with almost no airflow because they're so covered in dust, and even then on the outside of the windows they have old-fashioned metal rain deflectors. But I begin thinking to myself that maybe the voices are coming from outside that window. I'm just hearing them over the barrage of banging on the door. At this point, I'm at the last section of rows of chairs. There are 3 large sections of rows of chairs, and the aisle I sort of entered the court floor from is at the start of the middle aisle. The whole time I was working my way to the end of that aisle and the beginning of the aisle nearest the storage room. I'm walking incredibly slow at this point, trying to figure out what's going on. When I reach the start of that 3rd aisle, shit gets real. The pounding crashes with my footsteps to the point I look down at my feet and legs and see if I'm triggering something, but nothing at all. With each single step I take, the pounding becomes more intense. The door is being pushed out so far now that I can sort of see the darkness from the room behind it at an angle, and I'm watching like a hawk, trying to spot what's pushing it out. The last 3 steps I took were the most intense thing, where I had to admit to even myself might be beyond what I'm thinking. I'm suddenly getting the sense that I'm not wanted, or I'm being intimidated by whoever's behind this prank or otherwise. I'm fixated on the pounding, moving door now, and I swear I hear or sense something else to my right. I'm imagining that? The pounding door synchronized with my movement is not imagined. I reach the very last chair of the aisle. Maximum everything at this time, and I'm expecting to see something with my own eyes that should not be seen. My right foot comes down firm and slow at the last chair. The instant my foot hits the floor, everything stops. Goes to absolute quiet. That was in an instant. No cool down, slow down of any kind, just instant with my foot crossing that last boundary. When that happens, regardless of whatever was causing it, it was intentional and I was being watched, which is what creeped me out. That very moment I freeze in my tracks completely, not knowing what to expect in that instant. In that first brief moment of silence, I give the loudest, most serious "fuck this" I've ever spoken. Still frozen in place, I'm just about to begin writing the text to my coworker if somebody was inside the room, but the instant my thumb touches the screen, I heard the lobby door that I entered, and still frozen in place, I turned my head as far around as I could. And I see who entered, and it is my coworker. Seeing him suddenly freeze up my body, and I finally move and turn around to look at him. He missed it by seconds, easily less than 10 seconds, and he heard nothing, he saw nothing. He quickly just comes down the aisle, and I ask him in a very serious tone and face. I tell him when I was about to text him, and I ask him, is somebody in the storage room doing something? He says no, and just walks past me into the smaller manual door. I quickly tell him to give me a simple response. I can give him that door was moving as something was just behind it moving it. Tell him that I was going to wait for him because there might be a person in there or an animal, and I don't want to get surprise attacked by either. So he says, let's check it out. He opens the smaller door and I follow him in. It's completely dark in there, and he reaches in and turns on the light and makes his way over to the electronic door. Nothing. Nothing in there at all. All is suddenly quiet and normal as it has been for over the past year. Nothing out of the norm, really, except for whatever that thing I just encountered was. He obviously just dismisses me as he hits the door button to raise the door and says it was probably the wind. I tell him with the most serious face and tone, that was not the wind. I then point at the door and ask him if in all the years he's been here, if we've ever seen this door move for any reason at all. Be it the wind or anything besides, going up or down when being manually controlled to do so. He thinks for a second and looks at me and shakes his head and says no. I tell him exactly. I've never seen it move ever for any reason in the entire time I've worked there. He doesn't know what to say and just shrugs. I've no clue what to say as I'm still rattled and astounded by what had just transpired. With nothing else to say, I give a hopeless, sarcastic, I guess it was just ghosts then. To which he immediately responds in a seriously quiet voice, don't say that. He then looks at me and says, this place is haunted. He mentions that in particular the Auditorium. So it has been said. Who or where we heard this from, I didn't ask. I said, thanks for letting me know. Or something like that. I then sigh and tell him I don't tell people anything about this, but at times I sometimes see what looks like a figure walking up there. And that's as I begin to point at the foyer. He immediately interjects, up there, right? He tells me he's also seen what looked like a person walking along that same area and then just vanish. I tell him that I see it somewhat common, and I even saw it the day before. But I always chalked it up to my imagination or a trick of the light. I also tell him of something that happened more recently when I was on the other side of the court. It's where I thought I saw someone quickly dart toward me with a few feet, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. My blood run cold that time because I thought somebody had snuck up on me and was going to attack me. I tell him, well, at least we're not crazy, or at least we're seeing the same thing, whatever it may be. Because of that big event we had sort of set up for, I needed help from another worker from another department whom I knew and worked with before in that same setup. So at least I wasn't alone in that room for the rest of the time there. Even the janitorial ladies showed up earlier and sat in the seats waiting for us to finish up, so I was never really alone the rest of the time, save the very last few minutes. I tell the other worker of what just happened minutes before, and he gets freaked out and believes me. He says he doesn't want to stay in the auditorium. Everything else goes normal as follows, and the setup gets done earlier than normal since I adopt a more efficient way of switching out furniture. Several times during the setup, I go into the storage room and look around for a possible explanation for what just happened. A silent tornado somehow coming through the window? Nah. Air pressure difference between rooms. Doesn't look like it would really explain the nature of the way this was pounded. I figured a pressure difference would be a one-time thing, like an instant, not a barrage. I just witnessed this barrage. And even then all the doors were sealed and locked. Mechanical? I know something mechanics like an electric desk can sort of go both directions at times and tremble. I mean, with the controls on the door, not only can I not make it do that, but the machine is so slow to torque up that I couldn't even get it to move at any speed to get it remotely disruptive. Not only that, but the door doesn't even move in the way it had been moving outward. Some serious force was needed to push it out like that. I then did notice a ladder that I've never seen before, at least never gave any attention to. It was just a little sort of past the mechanical door. It was the kind of ladder that's built into a building and led up into a blackened ceiling above. I didn't hear any noise after the silence began, and I look at the base of the ladder and it's completely surrounded by industrial fans. Someone would have had to jump over the fans to reach the ladder. Not impossible, so I wasn't ruling this out. But it's the only other obvious rational thing I could think of. We nearly finished the setup, and my leaves just go back to him, go back to his apartment with very little more to do, and I still have the janitor lady now cleaning up the floor. I quickly finish up and now have to deal with closing the storage room doors. This was the point where I tested the mechanisms and controls to see if it could be a mechanical thing in nature. And it was pure coincidence that it began and ended where it did with only me as the only witness. I closed the mechanical door, plan how to get out of there as fast as possible with the light still on. I get to the smaller door and stand outside, just barely close enough to flip the light switch on inside. That little door is so heavy that when closed quickly it makes the loudest gunshot-like sound, like it's hitting the floor. So I always close it really slow to avoid that and hurting my ears. Not this time. I flipped that switch, slammed shut that door as fast as I could, and then pressed my luck further. I didn't want to come back to the auditorium, and I sent the sort of lighting in advance to the renters' arrivals, their preferred dance setting, which happens to be fairly dark. I took a good look around from the stage of the auditorium where the lighting controls are and plotted it in. Once I saw the lighting was good, I headed straight to the exit. I can't recall if the janitor was still in the room at the time. I don't think she was. I head to the double doors, and for the first time, instead of locking them until their renter arrived, I left them wide open into the sunlit lobby to back into the office to wait for another coworker who was closing. He was 30 minutes late, but he did bring good New York-style pizza, so I forgave him. I told him what had happened. He said the same thing as I would have, at least if I were in his shoes. Very skeptical and mentioned all the possible causes. I told him I wouldn't have believed it either had I not been there, and that I was still expecting to have someone jump out with video footage of a prank. I'm still expecting that to this very moment, actually. I tell him that I'm at a crossroads trying to decide if I write about it at the end of the day report, but if I did, I wouldn't know what to write or what to include. So I go back home, back to my normal life, my weekday job, more or less, but I still try to rationalize what transpired. Of course, I told my friends, but I didn't go over the details in any way like I am here. A couple of days later on Tuesday, my aunt visits because my mother had been admitted to the hospital for some serious, possibly life-threatening condition. She shines off for months. My aunt is asking me how I feel about the whole situation, and I tell her that I've been expecting it for a long time, and I'm adjusted to what may come. I tell her I'm more disturbed by what just occurred to me at work, and I tell her she's religious, but also has an open mind, and she reminded me of a recent story of a group of people who lived in a small, mall for over a year hidden away. Suddenly it seemed to click in my head. It made the most rational means. Why would they do that to me, and let alone how it happened? Beats me, but I'm so troubled by this incident that I contacted my boss and asked her if she'd ever had anyone like a vagrant or something occupy the space above the storage room. She tells me that there are some who sleep around the building, but not inside. I tell her she may want to send somebody to check to make sure nobody's up there, or to send an exorcist. She inquires why, and I tell her as best as I could without sounding crazy, basically saying that somebody might be up there. They also mention that I've seen things, and I saw something I've never seen before in all my time there. Not even a fraction. She asks me to give some examples of stuff I'd seen. I respond to her that it's sort of the kind of stuff nobody talks about, and left it at that. But I did mention the story of the people living in the mall to her. She said she was going to have a complete walkthrough of the area the following day, which was yesterday, Wednesday. I started writing this Wednesday night, and it's now 1 a.m. Thursday, at the moment at least. I have no other update, but I did see that she altered the current schedule so that there would be longer overlaps of workers during the setup and breakdown of the auditorium, so that way there would be a minimum of 2 people there. I have nothing else to report. I was planning on doing some ghost hunting or detective work this coming Saturday and Sunday, but I received a doctor's note today that my back is a bit messed up from doing the auditorium by myself, so I'll be off this weekend. I'm sure people are going to think I chickened out, and I'm sure word spread around the entire center and beyond, and still expecting footage of my reaction to pop up somewhere in social media as some sort of Ghostbusters tie-in, or like an extension of the $666,000 $666 income late night with the devil, like some sort of marketing tactic. Also, there are no cameras anywhere inside the center. There might be one at the receptionist desks, if at all. At no time was I ever afraid, just curious and creeped out. You wrote that in capital letters, sir, and that's not what I remember just reading. One thing, several hours later as the dance is nearing the actual start time, I get a person sort of associated with the renter of the dance who I have to deal with before, and he tells me that there's no power on the stage outlets. It's never happened to him before, but they need my help, so I go. There's always a female DJ who provides the music from the stage, but this time it was a new guy who was very tall and slender. He tells me that the outlets on stage right are not working. I test them, and they are indeed not working. I text my boss to inform her, and she states that I may need to contact a special department to come over here to do it. I'm not going to do that, as I don't want to deal with anyone or even be in that room. I borrowed the DJ's extension hub with the power indicator light to test for a working outlet. I find one on the other side of the stage. I tell the DJ I found one, and he says, great. I routed to the front of the table where he set up and done. I begin to walk away toward the steps to kind of the court floor, and he stops me. I turn around, and it's very dark, so I have a hard time seeing his face in that moment. He asks me my name, and I tell him. He reaches out his hand to me, and I shake his, and he says, thank you. My name is... Then he says something that completely got me off guard. He says, you are a real man. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I sort of chuckle because I'm not sure what he means, and because it was really awkward that really just happened. Didn't expect the gratitude and especially the comment, but as I turn around, I'm facing the door, and I ponder to myself. What did you ponder to yourself? You've got me. Travertine Hot Springs. This past October, I went on a road trip up the mountain with my mom and my sister. My mom had been trying out in the Springs, for a pretty good while, but I always had work and other obligations. Growing up in New Mexico, we'd visit our local hot springs at least twice a month, and Travertine reminded her of an old spot. It was a long drive, medium hike, and a short dip, but it was worth it. Brought our dogs with us, and they loved every minute. Once the sun started getting low, the dogs got anxious. We decided to pack up and head up. My dogs started barking, so I decided to take them out on a trail ahead a few yards and walk back to the group. I got maybe 50 yards up in the trail, and I stopped. This is a bad idea. Dummy, it's almost dark, and there might be cats out. You need to be in a group, I said aloud to myself. Then I heard what sounded like a shrieking whirlwind surrounding me and Henry. Henry cowered between my legs. The treetops weren't moving, but the wind continued, and I heard 2 women whispering to each other from behind me. Let's keep whispering and talking about him, so he'll come and we'll see what we're saying. I turned around and I saw my mom just getting on the trail and my sister halfway about 25 yards between us. That's not whispering distance. The wind fades away, but it sounded like laughter. I stood still and waited for my mom and sister to catch up. I was worried that turning around when I heard my name might have been confirmation enough for them to attach. We got back to the truck and my mom unlocked with her keys and had us pack while she used the outhouse. We were the last vehicle in the lot, and we haven't seen anyone in about half an hour. When we finished packing, my sister waited for the truck with the dogs. After a few minutes, my mom comes back and asks if she gave us the keys. "Nope, sorry Mom, you had them the whole time. Did you drop them in the hole?" She didn't, but spent some time searching, and it was odd. My sister suggested that I walk down the trail, and I suggest that comes with me because it's dark and there could be cougars. We found the keys placed neatly on a post down the trail from the lot. I clicked the key fob and it wasn't in range. Let's get out of here. It had snowed the week before, and so we drove slow on the way back down the mountain, and while chatting on the way down, Mom randomly drops, "You two know that if you hear your name called in the woods not to follow it, right?" I laugh and I go, "Wait, so that definitely wasn't you then?" My mom's posture goes stiff and she says not to talk about it as we're still driving. Especially not at the woods at night. We grab a pizza for the rest of the drive home and don't talk about it. My mom drops me off and my roommates were watching the prom scene from Carrie. The scream sounded just like that whirlwind. The next day I asked my mom what the hell that was all about and she told me little girls were calling her name trying to lure her away from us further down the path. Red shoes. My grandpa lives in an older house by himself. My grandma passed away in August of 2021, leaving behind a house full of old antiques. Each room is filled with all sorts of things, from old glassware to old bonnets that ladies and girls used to wear. She collected many different things. She was a hoarder, but kept her house clean and her antiques organized. Anyways, throughout the years of her collecting strange things would accompany and kind of happen. They would hear whispering, see people that they can't explain in their house, ghosts in parentheses, etc. After a while, they got used to it. Since she's passed away, has continued to have paranormal experiences. This experience happened recently. There are 3 bedrooms in the house. My grandpa used to sleep in the bedroom in the back, but ever since my grandma passed, he moved himself to the bedroom up front. He figured that it was easier for him to get to the bathroom. One night, he got up in the middle of the night to go use the bathroom. He's very used to paranormal things happening to him, but this experience scared him. He started walking to the bathroom and stopped dead in his tracks. In front of him stood a woman. He said that she was wearing a white dress with red shoes. She had blonde hair and that was tied back. Hey, not black for a change. Or white. He stood there as she walked toward him and didn't say a word. She didn't say anything to him as she walked toward him. Next thing you know, she vanished right before his eyes. Stood there for a few seconds wondering what just happened. He told me that after he witnessed that, he no longer had to go to the bathroom. He has not seen her since. I asked him, did she look transparent or did she look like a regular person? He said she didn't look transparent and she didn't look like a random person. It was just like something walking toward him in the house until she disappeared. He said that this really spooked him and he hopes that he doesn't see her again. And I don't blame him. Baby monitor. This is my grandpa's story. My grandma passed away in about 2021 of cancer. But before this, my grandpa took care of her in her house before she passed. In order for him to do chores around the house or backyard, he had to put a baby monitor in the living room so he could hear if my grandma needed something. After she passed, he decided to keep it in the living room so he could hear if somebody broke into his house. Since he now lived alone and his hearing isn't the best. He kept the other half in the monitor in his room where he slept. He told me he would sometimes hear voices coming from the living room at night through the monitor. He could never decipher what they were saying. It sounded like chatter. He couldn't understand. He got used to this until one night he heard a familiar voice come through. He was laying in bed trying to fall asleep, and he heard my grandma's voice call for him. What he heard was, "Jerry, Jerry." He was shocked to hear her voice calling his name. He got up out of bed to check the living room. For a split second, he forgot that she had passed. Once he got into the living room, he didn't see anyone in there, and he was just creeped out and went back to bed. He hasn't heard her voice since. The Soldier. This is my dad's story. With all of the weirdest things that have happened, this one takes the cake. My dad doesn't really speak of many paranormal experiences. This one freaked him out enough, though. And if he told me, it must be something. One night he went to bed with my mom and their dogs. My dad falls asleep pretty fast, but for some reason that night he couldn't. Some background information. My parents at the time had 2 cats, Sweet Pea and Baby Princess. My sister named her when she was 6. Their cats would sometimes go into their room when they were sleeping. My parents always slept with their door open. I could never really do that. It creeps me out. Their room is the first room where you would reach at the top of the steps. Anyways, my dad was laying in bed, tossing and turning. He flipped on his back and closed his eyes. When he was laying there, he felt a pressure going up his legs. He figured the cats were walking up his legs. He then realized the pressure was going up his legs and ended up to his chest. He couldn't move a muscle. That's when he started to choke. His eyes popped open and he looked over, and there was a figure standing over him with his hands around my dad's throat. According to my dad, the figure had a black World War II Nazi uniform on with a black uniform hat that had a swastika on it. The choking lasted for some time until my dad told it to get the fuck off him. Then it disappeared. My dad was freaked out. Got up and checked inside all of our bedrooms and throughout the house, but couldn't find anyone anywhere. Everyone was asleep. I asked my dad why he thought the Nazi was choking him. He said he wasn't sure why. Maybe he was an old, angry relative. My grandma grew up in Germany through the war, and my grandma's dad was a Nazi. So to say the least, we had some relatives that were in the war. I'm not sure why this ghost attacked my dad, because he was the strongest in the house, but who knows? My dad isn't one to make up stories like this, so I believe him. He's a very strong and brave man, and it takes a lot for him to get scared. He told me that this really got to him and that he was scared for us, and this is why he got up and searched throughout the house. Usually, if paranormal things happen, he doesn't say much because he didn't want to scare us when we were kids. I know that some of you might think that he had sleep paralysis when this happened, but my dad didn't suffer from this. He told me that this was the first and only time he couldn't move like this. The Amish Girl. My grandma throughout the years collected old antiques. Every room in her house was full of them, from paintings to pottery and everything in between. Since she had all of these antiques, my grandpa and my door just slammed shut. From paintings to pottery and everything in between, since she had all of these antiques, my grandpa and her experienced a lot of paranormal things. This experience happened when she was in her room. One day my grandma decided that she wanted to sleep with her head in the bottom of the bed in front of the AC unit where she had her window. She fell asleep and was sleeping for a bit, and next thing you know, she hears this noise coming from one of her dressers. She opens her eyes and saw a little girl playing and dropping the dresser bail pull. The girl wasn't facing her when she was playing with the pull. My grandma quickly closed her eyes because she couldn't believe what she had seen. She waited a few seconds before she opened her eyes again. When she opened her eyes again, the little girl was close to her face, staring at her. My grandma got really scared and closed her eyes again, and when she again opened them, the little girl was gone. My grandma told me that after she experienced that, she never slept on the bottom of the bed again. She also never saw this little girl again either. I asked her what the girl looked like. Grandma said she had like a bonnet and a long dress with long sleeves. My grandma actually had an old bonnet that she had in one of her rooms in the house. I fully believe that the little girl used to own this bonnet, and this is why my grandma saw her in her room. My grandparents have had so many experiences in their house that I fully believe my grandma's story. The uninvited guest at a school trip. The year was 2000. Our all-girls school trip to Hill Station was a whirlwind of excitement. 3 nights, 4 days, packed with sightseeing and cultural events. On the first evening, a fun-filled program kept most of us entertained. 3 classmates, however, opted to skip it due to travel fatigue. The second night, after a day of exploration, we huddled in our room, 8 of us. Spooky stories, a staple of school outings, filled the air. Laughter and goosebumps danced in the flickering lamplight as the clock struck 3 a.m. before we finally drifted off to sleep. Around 4 a.m., a chilling sound shattered the silence. Short, periodic bursts of laughter. It was M, the resident prankster. I liked this guy. But something was off. Her laughter lacked its usual warmth, replaced by an unsettling emptiness. We thought it was a joke, but a slap on the arm, sort of, from S didn't faze her, and her laughter morphed into rapid-fire gasps. By 4:30 a.m., our bed began to vibrate violently. Panic surged. Was somebody having a seizure? Flicking on the light, we witnessed a horrifying sight. M's body contorted in an unnatural tremor. Little P bravely reached out to comfort her, but M lunged, teeth bared. We scrambled to pull P back as M, in a frenzy, tore into the mattress, leaving a smear of blood. The convulsions subsided, leaving her collapsed, eyes rolling back. Fear, cold and suffocating, gripped us. We alerted our teachers and the school principal. Our school principal was a reverend nun. They rushed in and offered prayers, blessing the room. M, drained but peaceful, slept deeply. Later, the principal questioned us about that night's events. We confessed to the ghost stories, and shockingly, the 3 girls who missed the cultural program revealed a secret. A Ouija board session. They'd used a chart paper and summoned a spirit that wouldn't leave. After much pleading, they managed to send it back. But perhaps it lingered. Notably, M was sleeping on the exact spot where the board had been placed. The next day, Emma woke with a fever, oblivious to the night's horrors. This instant left an indelible mark on us, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that sometimes lurk in the shadows. Thought that was good writing until that last paragraph. Gave me a red flag. It was too easy and fun to read. Graveyard at night. A couple of years back, my friends and I decided to book an Airbnb to celebrate Christmas. We ended up finding one for a good price, except it was in a rural area. What we didn't realize was that it was right across the road from a graveyard. Once we arrived after a long drive, we unpacked our things and decided to explore the area. There was a couple houses down the road, but the rest of the land was empty. Surrounding us, and basically a huge field with tall, dry grass. We noticed the graveyard, but didn't go inside of it. After a couple of days, we were hanging out in the kitchen after dinner. It was already dark, and it must have been around 10:30. One of my friends then suggested that we go explore the graveyard, since we haven't actually been inside of it yet. We talked about the idea for a while, and 2 of my friends decided to stay at the house. That left 3 of us to go exploring. We found a flashlight and walked across the street. By then it was already 11 o'clock. We walked around for a bit, just reading the names on the graves, scaring each other, etc. The friend carrying the flashlight walked away, while 2 of us were left in the dark. The girl that was left with me got scared and ran toward the friend with the light, but she accidentally tripped on someone's grave and stumbled. But while she was still regaining her balance, she stepped forward and tripped over the same guy's tombstone. She was all right, luckily. Nothing creepy had happened, so we were slightly disappointed. We went to bed, and I was sharing a bed with the girl who had tripped. At like 2 a.m., she was aggressively shaking me. She said she heard knocking on the window beside her bed. We were silent for a couple of minutes, but didn't hear anything. I lied back down, except as soon as I did that, I heard knocking on the wall. We were both pretty scared at this point. We decided that if we heard it one more time, we would wake up our friends. We waited for time to pass, and after a while, we heard 2 sharp knocks against the bed frame. We immediately got up to wake our friends, but they didn't believe us. To this day, we're still not sure what that was. The Ghost Brother. This happened to me when I moved to Bangalore with my master's degree. I stayed at an Air Force hostel, and the Air Force providing accommodation for the children of its personnel. Let me describe the hostel setup. There were 4 buildings, 2 of which were horizontally adjacent to each other. The above is a top view of the hostel building, with G representing the building for girls and B for boys. My room, G1, was the second to last toward the B1 building. A dot represents a large banyan tree in the middle of the compound, which covered all 4 buildings. And because most defense campuses have lush greenery, the hostel stayed cool. The girls' buildings were extra secure with barbed wire and CCTV, and nobody could enter or leave after 9 p.m. Here's an idea of my room. My bed was placed next to the door and window, with the washroom opposite the side. The hostel buildings were 2-story buildings. My room was on the ground floor. The floor plan consisted of a long balcony in front of rooms in a single row. Now let me share my experience. This incident took place in July when the college session had ended. Not many people were around, and my roommate hadn't arrived yet. I was undergoing the counseling and college section process at that time. This basically meant I didn't have any classes to attend yet. Most of my days were spent watching Netflix true crime documentaries or YouTube true crime or short horror films. A few people in the hostel had some semester-end exams left, so they were there, but mostly the hostels were empty. As usual that day, I was binge-watching some series. When it was around 3 a.m., I suddenly started hearing someone walking on the first-floor corridor. At first, I was quite unbothered, but the footsteps got heavier over time. Meanwhile, I heard that somebody from the first-floor corridor balcony dragging a heavy metal object on the floor as well. I was annoyed at this point, but went out to ask the other girl whom I knew would walk around at night rather, and walk more quietly, maybe. However, I've never heard her walk around like this at this hour at least before. Went out to my corridor balcony and peeped up, but no one was there, so I come back in and thought to myself that it was probably something related to the video I was watching and rewound to check. Now for context, I don't like light in my room, so my room's light was off. But the washroom's light was on, casting a dim light. From the corner of my eye, I saw the silhouette of a manly figure standing there, holding some kind of metal chair in his hand. Immediately, I switched on the light in my room, and right after that, I heard the same sound of someone walking and dragging something just outside my room on my corridor balcony. I tried checking for my window, which is right above my bed, but no one was there. At this point, I thought to myself that all this was in my mind, and it was playing tricks on me. Never given much thought to the paranormal, and this couldn't be something of that sort. I do know there's negative energy and positive energy. but I'd never thought about the paranormal. So I kept my laptop aside and went to sleep, telling myself that I'd had enough crime and blood for one day. The next day I went to my friend's room, and the girl who sometimes walked at night was there too, but it was never past 12 o'clock that she would walk in the corridor. I asked the girl if it was her who was walking at 3 in the morning, but her reply left me wondering what could have been happening the night before. She told me she went to bed by 10 because she had an exam the next morning. My friend asked me what happened. I told them I heard somebody walking and dragging some heavy metal object last night. That's when my friend told me the story of the ghost brother. Apparently, in Building B1, there lived a boy his room was the last toward the G1 building. He had a twin sister who used to live in my room, and her roommate was his girlfriend. This guy was a national-level basketball player and was absolutely fit and fine. It was routine for the sister to wake her brother up every day by calling him, but that day he didn't respond to her rings. The whole day passed and even his roommate didn't bother him, thinking that he needed time to recover. But when even at 8:30 p.m. the guy didn't pick up his sister's call, she asked his friends to check on him and get him out of the room. After many attempts to call him and get him to open the door, the other boys broke the door and found him no more. Fortunately, he had been rejected by the one he loved and committed suicide. Since then, people have heard him walking around, and the girls who stayed in my room before experienced strange noises, and in the corner of their eye would see someone standing in their room. My experience. I was a freshman in college in Tallahassee, Florida during 2017-2018 school year. Let me preface this by saying I never believed in the supernatural or paranormal prior to my experience there. So the summer after my high school graduation, many of my friends had to take a mandatory summer term as a sort of orientation at FSU. I went to the community college to transfer, so I didn't have to. I went to visit for a weekend to kind of get a feel for the city before I moved up to the fall. While I was staying in my friend's, soon-to-be roommate's dorm room, he woke me up on his way to the morning class, so I figured I would take a walk around the campus. When I entered the stairwell, I noticed the initials TB written on the window like somebody would with their finger against morning dew. Figured it was some type of tradition that kids did, so I tried to write my own initials, except I couldn't because they were written from the outside. That was the 3rd floor of a stairwell. Didn't know anything about Ted Bundy besides him being a serial killer. No clue his killings were in the Tallahassee or that there were really ghost stories attached either. Fast forward to the fall semester and we lived in a house just across San Luis Park, which was like a nature trail attached to a historic mission from the 1800s. The whole trail is a complete circle with paths that branch off toward the center if you know how to cut through quicker, except for one spot where there's a perfect fork in the road. I remember being with 2 of my roommates walking our dog along the trail when we came across it. We stood there for a minute and decided which way to go, but I looked up and there was a Grim Reaper doll sitting on the tree branch about 30 or 40 feet up in the air. Thought nothing of it at the time, and as I looked, it could have been just like a Halloween decoration. Why someone would go through all the trouble to put it up there, I haven't the slightest idea. I just mean the tree stood about 15 feet behind the fork with thick brush in between. Then Hurricane Irma hit us. When I got back to Tallahassee, the first thing I did was go down the trail to see if I was still really a walkable trail. I arrived at the fork and noticed the tree is still there, but the Grim Reaper isn't. So I decided to look around a little bit for it, and it took me about 5 minutes. And I was about to give up, but right when I told my roommate, "Dude, where the fuck is it?" I look up and there it is. Not lying on the ground, but sitting perfectly upright on a branch that had been knocked off clean the tree. Again, I didn't believe in the paranormal, so I took it home with me. Figured it would make a nice addition to the house. And boy did it. The roommate in the master bedroom was the resident stoner of the house, so we would always kind of partake in our herbs and wax in there. And one day I was out of class early and home before anybody else. Went in there to roll up. As I'm rolling, I noticed the box fan on the right stand starting rocking back and forth a little, and my instinct was to call his dog. He was downstairs the whole time. My next thought was, did a rat just run by and hit the power cord? Got down on my hands and knees, face against the floor, and scanned the whole room, and nothing. His bed was raised, his dressers were raised, I could see the whole floor from where I was, and I was alone. As I'm getting up and walking back to the table, I hear something, so I turn around. Something pushed the door open, and I still don't know what it is. A few months go by and not much happened in between, but I do remember looking in the woods directly adjacent to our house, the trails where I found the doll on the opposite side of the street. There were decades-old beer cans and plastic bottles. I found an old sword sitting there, so I took it home because who doesn't want a sword, right? Right. Now, it's the end of spring semester, and we're all getting ready to move out. This is when the weird stuff starts happening. A ton of shit that was going to get thrown out, so we got the sword out and started doing what guys do best. Sure as shit, the decrepit old thing breaks right off the hilt, but that wasn't really going to stop us. One of my friends grabbed the bare blade and basically cut his palm open while he was messing with it. Go back inside and sit up on the counter next to the sink while we put pressure on the cut to stop the bleeding. It wasn't a nasty gash that needed stitches, but he ended up going completely limp and pretty much falling over, banging his head on a cabinet. Woke up shaking and covered in sweat. He isn't hemophobic, but he's definitely, didn't lose that much blood, so it was just kind of a weird thing. Now it's move-out time. Everything was put into a U-Haul, and we were sleeping on bedrolls in the living room for our last night, and there were 6 of us, plus 3 friends from back home. We're all waiting downstairs for the Ubers to show up and take us to the bars. While we're waiting, there's a loud boom from upstairs. It was directly above us, coming from the master bedroom. It sounded like a bowling ball had rolled off from the bed. Went upstairs to check it, but the room was empty. Nobody in it. Nothing in it. Everything was in the U-Haul already. It was an empty room. Figured it was the ghost's way of saying, "Bye guys, thanks for being good sports." It's been 7 years, and that noise still haunts me to this day. Just like this accidental accent from my friend from Tallahassee that I'm poorly displaying right now. Knock it off me. Lived in a haunted duplex a few years ago. So, several years back I was in the Army. I don't want to give the year or the specific post because that's way too much identifying information for me to comfortably put on the internet. For those unfamiliar with military posts or bases, they have houses on posts for the soldiers who don't live in the barracks. Officers and or married, to rent. This one I was in was kind of creepy. We had our cat, and on a regular basis, all his hair would stand on end, and he'd pretty much on the edge for a period of time. This was normally a very friendly cat. There was no correlation with anything else done that caused this behavior in him, but every so often he'd get like this. One night the stove burners turned themselves on. My wife and I, skeptical mind, says the cats were fucking around with the knobs and accidentally turned them on. But no such thing happened before or since, and when they don't play, they don't play near the knobs usually. Eventually we moved out and got a place off the military post. The cat never acted like that since we moved out, and no sudden outbursts or hair standing on end. It was the only that place really that made this happen, and no stove mysteriously turning on. And it was a house for military families, so obviously the chances of a previous tenant dying were pretty dang high. The funniest paranormal activity I've ever come across. So my mother and sister, not biological, used to live in the house where they would experience weird things, like footsteps, doors knocking, etc., but it was rare. That's why they kept living there. Anyway, now they moved to a new house, and I came to live with them. Some night I went downstairs to prepare some tea. My sister was sitting all by herself with low lighting since it was nighttime. She got startled when she saw me. I was like, "What are you scared of?" She said, "Oh, nothing." Then she told me she feels scared sometimes because of the weird things that used to happen in the old house. I said, "No, that was there." This house is so lovely and safe, I can't believe you're scared here. This house is small, nice, and just so cozy and safe. I kept saying safe, don't think otherwise. Like safe. There's nothing bad in this house. She's just 15 and I wanted her to feel safe. Anyway, I made tea, sat to drink it. We heard footsteps on the stairs. We both didn't care, and of course, it's my mother coming downstairs. It was so clear we were sitting in the same area where the stairs are. No way that we're mistaking it. Anyway, we heard somebody coming along the stairs, every step until my sister looked at the stairs and said, "There's no one there. No one came down." I get up to check what's happening, and there's no one. We went upstairs to find my mother sleeping peacefully in her room. Checked the whole house, no one else is there. Then she asked, "Weren't you saying this house is all safe? There's nothing in it?" I said it looks otherwise. I say that that's not funny and I'm disappointed. But thanks for the story. Please help. Intense work hauntings. Don't know what to do. I recently took over a massive 35,000 square foot storage facility. Pays great, good benefits and perks, and it's easy and stress-free. Except for the spirits haunting the building. It's 2 floors with a giant drive-through bay in the middle, splitting the sections up. 1 and 2 are on the right, top right, side 3 and 4 on the left. My first time alone doing a walkthrough, I was walking down the hallways in one section and a toy went off the locked unit. Thought it was a little weird, but not impossible, so figured it had a sensor and it caught me walking by. The 2 section was quiet at first as well, but now things have ramped up in a very short time. 3, I immediately felt my hair stand on end when I entered the first time, constantly looking behind me and hearing feet shuffling in an aisle or 2 over. Since then I've heard whispering that will stop when I stop walking, marbles rolling in front of me, my shirt got tugged, banging on the door shaking. Top of the shadows darting in the darkness and an 8-foot-tall figure peeking out of a corner observing me. I've had many experiences and never felt this uncomfortable in any of them, be it a home or another workplace. I feel like whatever's there is purposely screwing with me 3 weeks in and I'm considering saging the place. Not just for me to feel comfortable, but for the tenants as well. Hope you guys are comfortable. See ya.